Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast series for September Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. We're interviewing families who have gone through childhood cancer. Our guest today is Sam Wilson, mother of Jamie. To start, could you tell us about Jamie?
Yeah, sure. So Jamie is we live in the UK. He is 14 years old. He was unfortunately diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma in 2023, so just over 2 years ago now, when he was just 12 years old, and he has been battling the disease ever since, and he's achieved remission twice, but unfortunately has relapsed twice. And yeah, we're quite sort of far down the line in terms of treatments he's had and what treatment options are left for him. But he seems to bounce back each time uh, after every treatment, and we're hoping to keep him stable and to get him on a suitable trial. Um, but yeah, it's been a very, very long and difficult and tiring journey.
Yeah, could you tell me more about who Jamie is as a person and what makes him special?
Sure. So, Jamie is a typical teenage boy, really. I say typical. He's had a very different life in the last couple of years. I mean, prior to his diagnosis, he was very active, very sporty, very fit, very healthy. He played football 5 times a week. You call it soccer, I believe, in the US. We call it football here. But he was captain of the school football team. He played for two different teams, and he played for the school football team as well, of which he was appointed captain. Um, he loved football. He was a great footballer. He was just a fit, healthy, active, cheeky, fun, happy, popular young boy who, you know, had the world at his feet and um, no prior health conditions or anything to report. But he sadly, he got a couple of lumps appeared on his neck, and within a few weeks he was diagnosed with alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma.
So, could you tell us more about what the cancer journey has been like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm trying to put 2 years of very difficult times into a nutshell. But it's been tough, really tough. He After diagnosis, which took several weeks to diagnose officially, because initially the doctors in the hospital were sending us back home saying, "Oh, he's got an infection," and trying antibiotics and all this different kind of stuff, and it wasn't recognised to begin with. But when they did finally diagnose him, they um, gave him a pretty dismal prognosis, should I say, and they started him straight away on a chemotherapy regimen called Ivido, which is short for 5 different types of drugs, which I can't remember the names of off the top of my head. And he underwent that chemotherapy for 6 months. That was incredibly intense, incredibly difficult, incredibly tough on him and his body and us as a family. But for him to have to endure it, it made him very ill. Um, and he would, without without fail, every 7 days after, from the first day of having his chemotherapy, the chemotherapy regimen was 3 days every 3 weeks in 3 weekly cycles. 3 day, yeah, 3 weekly cycles, and it would be for 3 days at the start of those 3 weeks, and then on the seventh day of starting chemotherapy, he would then um, spike a high temperature. So we'd have to take him back into hospital because he had a Hickman line fitted, and they have to rule out sepsis and any other infections. And, obviously, chemotherapy comes with some very serious side effects. So we'd go back into hospital. We'd sometimes have to stay there for up to 10 days before we'd finally come home, and then literally have a couple of days before we'd have to then go in and start the cycle all over again. The chemotherapy made him very weak, very ill, very sick, very poorly. It was incredibly tough, incredibly difficult to watch him go through such awful treatment. And towards the end of that 6 months, he had 23 rounds of radiotherapy to the sites. He's on diagnosis. His cancer had metastasized, so he had several sites in his body where the cancer was present, and they gave him radiotherapy to several sites in his body. And then by sort of December 2023, he'd finished all of that treatment and was put onto a oral two oral chemotherapy tablets. But within 6 months of taking those, he sadly relapsed. So we were back to square one again, devastated, heartbroken that it had returned. And after he seemed to be doing so well, after achieving full remission, then he went on to another lot of chemotherapy called VIT chemotherapy, and he had that for a course of 10 months. I mean, that was long and grueling and tiring and exhausting. It didn't come with quite so many side effects that the initial chemotherapy did, but it was still hard going. It was given over 5 days, and it came with side effects and still hair loss, and he many side effects, which I won't go into detail of all of them, but pretty horrible, but not as bad as the first chemotherapy cycle or chemotherapy regimen that he had. And then that treatment put him into complete remission again. So we were obviously elated. We were grateful, happy. You know, he'd done it again. He'd beaten the disease. We felt, we were told that the VIT wouldn't necessarily be a cure, but even the oncologist was quite surprised and pleased how well the chemotherapy had gone and how well it had responded. And so the decision was made in February this year to then stop the chemotherapy because he was in remission. He'd had a lot of chemotherapy, and he was doing great for a couple of months, and he showed no signs of relapse. On the first relapse, he had some pain, so we were concerned that something had come back. But the second relapse, he had no pain. He looked really well. He was doing really well. He looked healthy. His hair started growing back. Started putting on weight. He had his energy back. But a scan sadly showed that a routine scan showed that it had returned back in April this year, and yeah, it was just heartbreaking again, all over again. And we then had very few chemotherapy options or options for treatment in the UK. We'd also been looking into getting him onto a clinical trial in the background in Germany for children in his situation, but that fell through. It didn't come off, unfortunately. So our options were very, very limited. I found a clinic in Germany that was able to offer some treatments that weren't offered in the UK. And fortunately, we had crowdfunded, and we have an incredible community behind us who were supporting Jamie and helped us to raise funds. So we were able to go over and have some immunotherapy. He was able to go over to Germany and have some immunotherapy treatments and try some different medications that weren't available to him in the UK. And we were out there for 8 weeks, which was pretty full on, pretty intense. And we returned only 3 weeks ago. Where they then scanned him again when we got back to the UK, and they offered him another oral chemo medication, which is where we are now, which is what he was on. And he appears to be touch wood, which is like something you say for good luck here in the UK. We He seems to be responding, and whilst it's not a cure, sadly, it seems to be stabilizing his disease, and he seems to be doing pretty good considering. So, you know, fingers crossed that everything is working and moving in the right direction. But I'm constantly looking in the background for trials and researching. And, you know, I've spoken to Charles Keller on a couple of occasions. I know they're working on some really great stuff in the background that unfortunately isn't ready yet, but you know, it just really goes to show how important his work is for parents like me, and for children like Jamie and other parents and children in this position. Um, you know, the ongoing research into rhabdomyosarcoma and the clinical trials and new drugs and new, safer, kinder medicines. And yeah, it's just so important. And I'm a massive trying to be a massive well, I am a massive advocate and trying to use my voice as much as I can to try and get the word out there and try and get support for hopefully one day some kind of treatments and a cure for this disease, because it's pretty brutal. And you know, but all I can say to anyone is try and just keep positive and keep hope, and try as much as you can, because you know Jamie's still battling and fighting through it, and he's doing okay. So yeah, we're going to keep going and going and going, and we're not going to give up.
I think you're doing a really good job.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I'm glad to hear that Jamie is doing better.
Thank you very much.
So, you mentioned before, but you and your family have been fundraising for Jamie's treatment. Could you share
Mm-hmm.
about what that's been like?
Wow, yeah. I mean, it's been we kind of started it nearly a year ago now, about 11 months ago now, because I was very keen to pursue anything and everything that I possibly could. I think, you know, any parent would do the same for their child. I mean, I certainly wanted to try everything and anything that we could. And we knew that to get him treatments, we had to look overseas. We knew that would come at a cost. We didn't know having. We originally raised funds for a clinical trial that we were hoping to get him on in Germany, so we knew we needed funds for that and travel costs, etc., etc. So we set ourselves a target and we fundraised for that. Sadly, when that fell through, which we were all devastated about, but we didn't ever want to give up, and we wanted to continue trying other things. But we knew that the clinic that we then pursued in Germany, which he ended up going to, we knew that was going to cost a lot more money than we had originally hoped and planned for. So we yeah, we had a whole team, a whole army behind us in raising money. We did all sorts of fundraising local events like football tournaments, cake sales, auctions, golf days. You know, we used social media. Social media became a really good and powerful tool to get the message out and to spread Jamie's story and try and get support and funding. And you know, today we've raised over £400,000, which has been incredible. And you know, I didn't do that alone. That was with a whole team of support from family and from friends and from our local community, and even from strangers who have seen Jamie's story and have donated either through social media or I mean, yeah, social media has been a brilliant platform to get support and fundraising, as well as a lot of the local events that people have organized and run to raise money. It's been amazing. I mean, we spent an awful lot of money at the clinic that we went to in Germany, and we exhausted most of our funds. But we're continuing to raise more, which is is incredible, but we do need to keep going, and we need to get his story out far and wide and try and raise us more money to get him the treatment he really needs, and to um, get him further immunotherapy and a further vaccine that we really, really hope we can get him.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So you also talked about how you went to Germany for treatment. So did you see any differences between the approach or care for childhood cancer between the UK and Germany?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was very different, but we when we left the UK, I mean, he had very good care in the UK, under the NHS here. There was never any question about the level of care he had, but we got into a position where there were no more treatments or barely any treatment options left for him, which is why we left the UK, and we actually, the clinic he was treated at, we then left pediatric care because you know, typically the clinic we went to don't usually treat children. It was they are more used to treating adults, but because Jamie's at that age, he's 14, nearly 15, he's not an adult, but he's not a young child either. Um, they were open to looking at his case and treating him, which I'm really grateful for, because we struggled here in the UK to get him, integrative care, and for him to get different treatment options here in the UK because of his age, which was a massive, massive barrier. Um, so yeah, it was very different from the outset, and also we went from the NHS, National Health Service, which is, I believe, it's very different to your care, medical care in the US as well. It is funded through people paying taxes here in the UK, the medical care, the healthcare. Um, so we kind of left that environment, and we went into private healthcare in a different country. So it was incredibly difficult from jumping from one, incredibly different, sorry, from jumping from one to the other. We were in the world of private healthcare, which was incredibly expensive, and they weren't as used to treating pediatrics, so it was a whole different environment, and um whole different experience, and not a bad one and not a negative one in any way. It was just different, of course, being in a different country as well, although everyone mostly at the clinic spoke really good English, so that wasn't a problem. And the staff were great, the doctors and nurses, and the staff working in the kitchen, etc. They were all great, but you're still in a different country, away from home, in a non-English speaking country, and to be there for 8 weeks, and it wasn't straightforward. He got quite poorly when he was out there at a couple of points, and yeah, it was hard, and it was very different to being here in the UK.
Yeah. So how did your perspective on childhood cancer or cancer in general change?
How's it changed? What, since, from for over what period, or
Oh,
from
since like
experience?
before Jamie was diagnosed.
Okay, so I mean, I didn't know anything about childhood cancer before. It's really not something you expect your to happen to your 12-year-old beautiful, healthy, fit boy. I knew nothing about it. I knew very little about cancer. Obviously, you hear about the big cancers, the breast cancers, the lung cancers, prostate cancers, etc., the ones you hear a lot about all the time in the news, in the media, but I'd never even heard of rhabdomyosarcoma. I couldn't even pronounce the word for the first 3 months after within him being diagnosed. It was, that was partly, I think, because I was in shock, but also because it's a long, big word, and I hadn't heard of it before. I didn't know how many cancers there were, period. I didn't know um, childhood cancer was very different to adult cancers. And I wasn't aware about the lack of funding that childhood cancers received, and how few drugs are come to the market for pediatric cancers versus adult cancers. over the course of, I can't quote the statistics, but I think there's several new drugs that get approved each year for adult cancers. For children, I think there's been a handful over the last 40 years in comparison. I find it very frustrating and irritating that the rarer cancers, that they don't get the attention and the funding that they deserve and they should get. Because when you are in this position and you're faced with such a difficult thing and difficult disease, um, you know, it should be higher on the list. It should be way higher. Pediatric cancers and support and funding and trials and drugs and treatments should be way, way higher on the list than they are currently, in the UK for sure. And I'm sure that goes worldwide too.
Yeah, what are the next steps and how will you and your family continue fighting for Jamie?
I mean, we will continue. It's hard to say what's around the corner. It really is. We know that the treatment options are limited. I will tirelessly look for suitable trials that may be available that he could go on. I will um, continue researching every day, every moment, spare moment that I have, to see what could be out there. And we will try anything that we think is suitable, as long as Jamie wants to, and he does want to. I mean, one thing I will say about him, he's incredibly stoic, he's strong, he's brave, he's resilient, his strength is incredible, amazing. He to go through what he's been through, like, and some that he's been through and experienced some of the toughest things any child or person would have to experience, and he still remains positive and happy, and he still fights on, and he wants to fight on. He's not ready to give up, and if he's not ready to give up, there's no way we're giving up either. So we will just continue pursuing everything that we can.
Yeah. That's kind of the end of our questions, but is there anything else you'd like to share?
um no, I think that's it. I've covered what I feel about, you know being an advocate for and championing the putting my voice out there to try and get things more heard out there for pediatric cancer, and support and funding and trials and kind of better treatments, because it's funded massively, and it's frustrating and it needs to change.
All right, thank you so much.